deep within a limestone cave on Mount Ida's southern slopes. Flickering oil lamps illuminated an extraordinary scene. Thousands of pottery vessels lined the cavern walls, offerings left by worshippers over countless generations. The cave at Camares had become a sacred pilgrimage site, where humans communed with divine forces, marking the beginning of Europe's first great spiritual tradition. This was the island realm in the dawn of civilization, where communities were creating something unprecedented. While the pyramids rose along the Nile and cities flourished in Mesopotamia, an island civilization was taking shape in the heart of the Mediterranean that would surpass them all in artistic achievement and peaceful prosperity. The island itself seemed designed by nature for greatness. Stretching 160 miles from east to west, this mountainous landmass floated like a jewel between three continents. Its natural harbors opened toward Egypt to the south, Anatolia to the east, and the scattered Cycladic islands to the north. This crossroads position placed the realm at the intersection of maritime routes that would soon carry precious goods across the ancient world. Fertile valleys nestled between mountain ranges, watered by seasonal streams and blessed with Mediterranean sunshine. Unlike the great river valleys where civilization depended on massive irrigation projects, this island offered a gentler path to prosperity through diversified farming and natural abundance. The soil supported wheat, barley, olives, and grapes, while wild game roamed the hills and fish teemed in surrounding seas. When the Bronze Age dawned across the eastern Mediterranean, 3 millennia before Christ, small farming communities dotted the landscape. Carbon-14 dating of charcoal samples from these early sites reveals a remarkable transformation. Scattered Neolithic hamlets evolved into substantial villages with stone foundations and sophisticated ceramics. At Knossos, in the north-central region, people had lived continuously since 7000 BC, making it one of Europe's oldest occupied sites. Excavation layers tell the story of gradual growth and increasing sophistication. Simple pit houses gave way to rectangular limestone buildings. Basic earthenware evolved into elegant vessels decorated with spirals, lines, and geometric patterns that revealed both practical skill and artistic sensibility. These early islanders made a crucial choice that would define their civilization's character. They built for accessibility rather than defense. Unlike their mainland contemporaries, who constructed fortified hilltop communities, the inhabitants chose locations near fertile valleys and natural harbors. This preference for openness over protection spoke to a fundamental confidence that would characterize their society for millennia. Commercial networks emerged with remarkable speed during these formative centuries. Obsidian blades, sharper than any tool, traveled from the volcanic island of Giali to workshops across the realm. This midnight black volcanic glass could only be found in a few Mediterranean locations, yet its presence in early sites proves that sophisticated maritime routes operated before 2500 BC. The real revolution came with copper. This versatile material flowed in from Cyprus and Anatolia, transforming daily life and technological possibilities. Local craftsmen mastered metallurgy with impressive speed, creating tools, weapons, and ornaments that marked a decisive break with the Stone Age past. Early axes found in burial sites show sophisticated understanding. The alloy was hammered while hot, then carefully annealed to achieve perfect balance between hardness and flexibility. The island's strategic position became increasingly valuable as these commercial networks expanded. Ships could shelter in protected bays while carrying goods between Egypt and Anatolia, or between the Levantine coast and the western Mediterranean. Local sailors, learning from contact with foreign mariners, developed formidable maritime expertise that would soon dominate the Aegean. Social transformation accompanied economic growth. Community hierarchy became apparent during the late 3rd millennium BC, with certain locations demonstrating clear signs of emerging complexity. Knossos, blessed with fertile fields and a natural harbour, grew beyond the size of surrounding villages. Its buildings became more substantial, its ceramics more sophisticated, its imported goods more numerous. The emergence of elite families appears dramatically in burial practices during this period. While most islanders continued receiving simple pit burials with modest grave goods, select individuals received elaborate treatment in chamber tombs carved into hillsides. These elite burials contained precious objects, gold jewelry, imported vessels, and carefully crafted daggers, indicating that some families had accumulated wealth and power far beyond their neighbors. This shift from collective to individual burial practices reveals profound social changes. Earlier, Neolithic communities had buried their dead in collective ossuaries, emphasizing group identity over individual status. The appearance of single burials with distinctive grave goods marked the emergence of personal wealth and social hierarchy. Spiritual practices evolved alongside social complexity, creating traditions that would define the island's sacred beliefs. Small shrines appeared within communities, featuring distinctive curved horns of consecration, symbolic bull horns that crowned altar areas where groups gathered for ceremonies. These sacred emblems, crafted from stone or clay, represented the first flowering of what would become elaborate iconography. Bulls commanded special reverence from these earliest periods. Wild bulls roamed the mountains, powerful and dangerous animals that inspired both awe and respect. Their horns became sacred emblems. Their images decorated ceramics and seals. This deep reverence would eventually develop into elaborate bull-leaping rituals that captured the imagination of later civilizations and gave birth to the legend of the Minotaur. Peak sanctuaries emerged across the island, ritual sites built on prominent mountaintops where ceremonies unfolded under the open sky. These elevated locations, visible from miles away, served as focal points for regional spiritual activity. The practice of mountain worship reflected profound connections between the people and their dramatic landscape. Goddess worship became increasingly prominent in spiritual life. Female figurines depicting women with prominent breasts and wide hips appeared in household shrines and burial contexts. These representations suggest that feminine deities played central roles in sacred beliefs, indicating that women held important positions in clerical hierarchies. The development of Europe's first writing system began during this transformative period. Simple pictographic marks started appearing on ceramics and seals, stylized pictures of humans, animals, and objects that represented the earliest attempts at written communication on the continent. These primitive signs laid the foundation for the sophisticated linear A script that would later record the transactions and beliefs of the palatial civilization. Seal stones became increasingly sophisticated during these centuries, carved with intricate designs and used to mark ownership or authenticate documents. Local craftsmen developed remarkable skill in creating these miniature artworks, carving detailed scenes into pieces of stone no larger than thumbnails. The images reveal intimate details of early island life: ships sailing across stylized waves, human figures in ritual poses, animals both domestic and wild, and mysterious abstract marks. Technological innovation accelerated throughout the 3rd millennium. The potter's wheel, introduced around the middle of the millennium, revolutionized ceramic production, by allowing craftsmen to create perfectly symmetrical vessels with thin walls and elegant proportions. This innovation, learned from contact with Syrian or Egyptian artisans, transformed earthenware from purely functional objects into works of art. Metallurgy reached new heights of sophistication as smiths mastered the challenging art of alloying copper with tin. This created a material harder and more durable than pure copper, but required importing tin from distant sources, possibly Anatolia, the Caucasus, or even Afghanistan. The ability to obtain this crucial component demonstrates the impressive reach of expanding commercial networks. Architectural techniques evolved steadily during these formative centuries. Builders constructed multi-story buildings using carefully fitted stone foundations and timber-framed upper floors. Flat roofs supported by wooden beams allowed for upward expansion, while providing useful space for storage and daily activities. These construction methods would later be refined into the sophisticated building traditions of the palatial period. Farming intensification supported growing populations and increasingly complex societies. Terraced fields appeared on hillsides, maximizing arable land while preventing soil erosion. Olive cultivation expanded dramatically as farmers realized that olive trees thrived on marginal lands unsuitable for grain crops. The olive's multiple products, oil for cooking, lighting, and ceremonies, olives for food, wood for construction, and fuel, made it invaluable to the economy. Craft specialization became pronounced as communities grew larger and more prosperous. Potters, metalworkers, stone carvers, and textile producers focused exclusively on their crafts, rather than combining production with farming. This specialization led to dramatic improvements in product quality and opened new possibilities for artistic expression. Textile production reached high levels of sophistication, judging from later representations and the elegance of island clothing. Sheep provided wool, while flax plants grown in valley bottoms supplied fibers for linen. The warm Mediterranean climate allowed for lightweight, colorful garments that would later amaze foreign visitors with their refinement. Maritime technology advanced rapidly as islanders learned from experienced seafarers from Cyprus, Syria, and Egypt. Early ships, represented in seal engravings and later frescoes, featured distinctive high prows and sterns perfectly suited for Mediterranean conditions. These vessels, built from local cypress and pine, could carry substantial cargoes while maintaining the speed and maneuverability necessary for successful expeditions. Permanent outposts emerged during this period as merchants recognized the advantages of maintaining bases in foreign ports. Small island communities appeared on Cycladic islands, serving as intermediary stations for commerce between the homeland and the mainland. These overseas establishments would later expand into a comprehensive network of commercial bases spanning the Aegean Sea. Cultural exchange accelerated as contacts multiplied. Egyptian influence appeared in local art and iconography, while Anatolian metalworking techniques improved production. Syrian ceramic styles inspired innovations. This cosmopolitan influence, filtered through local creativity, produced a unique cultural synthesis. Population growth and economic prosperity created conditions for revolutionary changes during the early second millennium. Successful farming communities accumulated surpluses that could support specialists, artists, and administrators. Commercial networks generated wealth that could fund ambitious construction projects. Spiritual traditions provided ideological frameworks for increasingly complex social hierarchies. Around 2000 BC, successful local leaders began constructing the first monumental buildings that would evolve into the great palatial complexes. These early edifices, modest compared to their successors but impressive by contemporary standards, marked the beginning of a new era in Mediterranean civilization. The scattered farming communities of 3 millennia earlier had evolved into a sophisticated proto-urban civilization. A prosperous economy supported growing populations. Extensive commercial networks connected the island to the wider Mediterranean world. Sophisticated craft traditions had developed unique artistic styles. Spiritual beliefs provided social cohesion and cultural identity. Most importantly, a tradition of peaceful cooperation, rather than military competition, had taken root. By the dawn of the second millennium, the foundations of greatness stood complete. Europe's first civilization was ready to construct the magnificent palatial centers that would make the island realm the Mediterranean's premier maritime power. The dawn of the second millennium, BC, brought revolutionary changes to the island realm. What began as modest ceremonial centers rapidly transformed into architectural marvels that would astonish the ancient world. At Knossos, Phaistos, Malaya, and Zakros, ambitious rulers commanded the construction of massive complexes that redefined Mediterranean society. These were not fortresses built for war, but centers of prosperity designed for peace. The first great structure at Knossos, begun around 1900 BC, covered over 4 acres of ground with a labyrinthine arrangement of rooms, corridors, and courtyards that seemed to grow organically from the landscape. Unlike the defensive citadels of contemporary cultures, these buildings opened their arms to welcome visitors, traders, and pilgrims from across the known world. The building innovations pioneered in these centers revolutionized construction techniques throughout the Mediterranean. Light wells, open vertical shafts that carried sunlight deep into interior spaces, eliminated the need for smoky torches in work areas. Sophisticated drainage systems channeled rainwater through carefully engineered conduits, preventing flooding while supplying the complex water needs of thousands of inhabitants. Advanced plumbing systems brought running water directly to royal apartments and ceremonial areas. Clay pipes, fitted with remarkable precision, carried fresh water from mountain springs to elaborate bathing facilities, complete with decorated bathtubs and flushing toilets. These hygienic innovations would not be matched in Europe for another 3,000 years, yet they were standard features in every major center by 1700 BC. The earthquake-resistant construction techniques developed by architects represented engineering mastery, born from harsh experience. The island's location along active seismic zones demanded innovative solutions. Builders employed flexible timber frameworks within massive stone foundations, allowing buildings to bend rather than break during earth tremors. Massive wooden columns, wider at the top than the base, distributed weight while providing the flexibility necessary to survive the frequent seismic activity. Storage capacity measurements from excavated magazines reveal the staggering scale of economic activity these centers coordinated. At Knossos alone, over 400 giant pithoi, enormous clay storage jars standing taller than a human, could hold more than 75,000 gallons of olive oil, wine, and grain. These systematic storage facilities enabled administrators to manage the farming output of thousands of estates across the island. The relationship between these grand complexes and surrounding communities created a unique form of governance that balanced central coordination with local autonomy. Each center controlled a distinct territory, collecting surpluses and craft products from dozens of satellite towns and rural estates. Unlike oppressive tributary systems common elsewhere, this arrangement benefited all participants through improved storage, distribution, and protection of essential resources. The mysterious script known as Linear A, though still undeciphered, provides tantalizing glimpses into the sophisticated bureaucracy that coordinated this complex economy. What scholars can decipher reveals meticulous record-keeping of livestock numbers, land holdings, craft production quotas, and spiritual offerings. The numerical systems and place names recorded in these documents show that bureaucrats maintained detailed knowledge of economic activity across their entire territories. The most readily interpretable content involves numbers and commodity signs. Scribes tracked thousands of sheep, hundreds of cattle, and vast quantities of products using a decimal system that facilitated complex calculations. Standardized measurement units for grain, oil, and other staples enabled precise resource management across geographically dispersed territories. Seals and their bureaucratic functions became increasingly sophisticated during this period. Hieroglyphic seals, carved with intricate spiritual and governmental symbols, authenticated documents, and marked ownership of goods. Officials used distinctive seal designs to validate transactions, creating an early form of identification that ensured accountability throughout the hierarchy. Craft specialization reached unprecedented levels within these complexes. Dedicated workshops for pottery production, metalworking, textile manufacturing, and stone carving occupied entire sections of buildings. Evidence from these areas reveals the tools, raw materials, and unfinished products that document intensive manufacturing activity coordinated by administrators. The artistic achievements emerging from these specialized workshops transformed Mediterranean aesthetic traditions. Frescoes, painted in brilliant blues, reds, and yellows, derived from imported pigments, depicted scenes of natural beauty and human grace that broke dramatically with the rigid conventions of Egyptian and Mesopotamian art. Flowing dolphins cavorted across bathroom walls, while elegant court ladies with elaborate hairstyles participated in sacred ceremonies. Marine motifs dominated decoration, reflecting the islanders' deep connection to the sea that surrounded and sustained them. Octopi with sinuous tentacles decorated pottery vessels, while schools of flying fish swam across walls. These naturalistic representations revealed an artistic philosophy that celebrated the beauty of the natural world, rather than emphasizing human domination over nature. Open design characterized every aspect of these structures, from grand staircases that welcome visitors to spacious courtyards where crowds gathered for ceremonies. The absence of defensive walls around complexes demonstrates the remarkable security these rulers enjoyed, while contemporary societies built massive fortifications to protect their centers of power. Island leaders relied on naval supremacy rather than land-based defenses. Evidence for the peaceful nature of this culture accumulates from multiple sources. Weapons appear rarely in contexts, and when present, they seem to serve ceremonial rather than military functions. Beautiful bronze daggers with gold inlaid handles were works of art designed for display, not warfare. The elaborate ritual vessels and sacred paraphernalia that fill storerooms stand in stark contrast to the arsenals that characterized other Bronze Age centers of power. The naval supremacy that enabled this peaceful prosperity becomes evident through remains found across the Aegean. Pottery, seals, and other artifacts demonstrate extensive commercial and cultural influence throughout the Cycladic Islands and along the Greek mainland. This maritime empire operated through economic attraction rather than military coercion, spreading prosperity wherever its merchants established trading relationships. Cycladic islands served as stepping stones for expanding commercial networks that eventually reached every corner of the eastern Mediterranean. On Thera, Melos, and other strategic islands, communities adopted building styles, artistic motifs, and spiritual practices directly inspired by the great centers. These voluntary cultural adoptions reveal the prestige and attractiveness of the island's advanced society. Mainland Greece experienced profound cultural transformation through contact with this sophisticated culture. At Mycenae, Pylos, and other emerging centers, local rulers adopted construction techniques, artistic styles, and governmental practices learned from island merchants and craftsmen. The famous shaft graves at Mycenae, filled with gold masks and elaborate weapons, show clear influence from artistic traditions combined with mainland military preferences. Spiritual practices centered on these complexes reached extraordinary levels of elaboration during this period. Priest kings, wearing elaborate ceremonial costumes and distinctive feathered crowns, presided over rituals that combined devotion with political authority. These rulers served as intermediaries between the human and divine realms, deriving their legitimacy from special relationships with the island's protective deities. Snake goddesses, represented in spectacular faience figurines found in shrines, embodied the feminine divine power that seemed to dominate sacred life. These bare-breasted figures, holding writhing serpents in outstretched hands, commanded both reverence and awe. Their prominent placement in sanctuaries suggests that women held positions of extraordinary influence in clerical hierarchies. Sacred caves throughout the island became pilgrimage destinations connected to state-sponsored festivals. At Psychro, Ida, and other mountain caverns, worshippers left thousands of bronze figurines, ceramic vessels, and precious ornaments as offerings to subterranean deities. These cave sanctuaries, linked to centers through processional roads and ceremonies, created an island-wide network of sacred sites. Peak sanctuaries proliferated during this period, with over 20 major mountaintop sites serving communities across the island. These elevated temples, visible from great distances, coordinated regional spiritual activities, while reinforcing the visual connection between human settlements and the divine forces believed to reside in high places. Bull leaping emerged as the most spectacular and physically demanding ritual of this era. Young athletes, both male and female according to fresco evidence, performed death-defying acrobatic feats using live bulls as partners in elaborate ceremonies. These performances, conducted in central courtyards before crowds of spectators, required extraordinary physical conditioning and precise timing. The physics of bull leaping, analyzed by modern experts, reveals that these performances were indeed possible, rather than purely symbolic representations. The athletes approached charging bulls head-on, grasped the animal's horns, and used the bull's upward head movement to vault completely over the animal's back, in a spectacular display of human agility and courage. The spiritual significance of these performances probably related to themes of human cooperation with natural forces rather than domination over them. Gender roles in this society demonstrate remarkable equality compared to contemporary cultures. Frescoes depict women participating in ceremonies, athletic competitions, and social gatherings with apparent freedom and dignity. The prominent representation of goddesses in sacred art, combined with evidence for female priestesses and possible female rulers, suggests that women enjoyed high status and considerable authority. The thalassocracy that emerged from coordinated naval resources created the Mediterranean's first true maritime empire. Unlike land-based empires that conquered territory through military force, this naval hegemony operated through commercial networks, cultural influence, and technological superiority. Island fleets controlled sea routes not through violence, but through superior seamanship and mutually beneficial trading relationships. This peaceful approach to imperial expansion created unprecedented prosperity throughout the Aegean region. Communities that joined the commercial network gained access to exotic goods, advanced technologies, and artistic innovations that enhanced their quality of life. The absence of military conquest meant that local traditions could blend with influences, creating diverse regional variations within a broader cultural synthesis. The script tablets provide tantalizing glimpses into the bureaucracy that coordinated this complex system. Though undeciphered, numerical notations and recognizable place names reveal a network that tracked resources, managed distribution, and coordinated activities across hundreds of communities. The sophisticated record-keeping capabilities evident in these documents enabled administrators to manage economic activity on a scale not seen again in Europe for over a millennium. The limits of modern understanding regarding this writing system create one of archaeology's most frustrating mysteries. While scholars can read numbers, recognize some place names, and identify commodity signs, the grammatical structure and vocabulary of the language remain completely unknown. This linguistic isolation suggests that the inhabitants spoke a non-Indo-European language unrelated to later Greek, making decipherment extraordinarily challenging. Art and building design from this period expressed a distinctive worldview that celebrated cosmic order through human creativity. The elaborate geometric patterns that decorated floors, the naturalistic frescoes that covered walls, and the elegant pottery that filled storerooms all reflected a sophisticated aesthetic philosophy that found divine beauty in both mathematical precision and organic forms. The integration of indoor and outdoor spaces reflected deep appreciation for natural environments. Gardens, courtyards, and terraces created seamless transitions between built and natural spaces, while large windows and open doorways ensured that fresh air and natural light filled interior areas. This design philosophy would later influence classical Greek and Roman building traditions. Technological innovations pioneered in workshops spread throughout the Mediterranean world through commercial contacts. Advanced pottery techniques, sophisticated metalworking methods, and innovative construction solutions developed by craftsmen were adopted by communities across the region. The peaceful nature of cultural transmission meant that innovations could be shared freely rather than hidden as military secrets. The economic foundations of prosperity rested on diversified production rather than exploitation of conquered peoples. Estates, craft workshops, and trading ventures all contributed to the wealth that funded construction and supported the elaborate court life depicted in frescoes. This broad-based economy proved remarkably resilient compared to military empires dependent on constant conquest for financial support. International relations during this period demonstrate the high regard in which the island culture was held by contemporary powers. Egyptian texts mention diplomatic contacts, while Mesopotamian sources reference the exotic goods and skilled craftsmen that came from the islands in the midst of the sea. These peaceful diplomatic relationships enabled cultural exchange that enriched all participants. The sophisticated urban planning, evident in complexes and associated towns, created living environments that prioritized human comfort and social interaction. Wide corridors encouraged movement and gathering, while numerous courtyards provided spaces for community activities. The integration of workshops, governmental areas, and residential quarters within single structures created the world's first true cities, designed for both efficiency and quality of life. By 1600 BC, this remarkable society had reached its zenith of power and cultural achievement. 4 major centers coordinated the economic and spiritual life of dozens of towns and hundreds of rural communities. Merchant fleets carried the island's products to every corner of the Mediterranean, while foreign visitors came to admire the marvels and artistic achievements that made this small island the envy of the ancient world. The prosperity and security that characterized this golden age seemed unshakable. Storerooms overflowed with surpluses, workshops produced goods of unmatched quality, and festivals drew pilgrims from distant lands. The peaceful nature of this maritime empire had created a stable foundation for continued growth and cultural development. Yet beneath the surface of this unprecedented prosperity, subtle changes were beginning that would soon transform the Mediterranean world forever. To the north, on the volcanic island of Thera, subterranean forces were building toward one of history's most catastrophic natural disasters. The explosion that would follow would test every assumption about permanence and security that this advanced society had built over 4 centuries of peaceful development. Centuries after the great centers fell silent, Greek storytellers would weave tales of a mighty king named Minos, who ruled from a fantastic royal residence filled with impossible corridors and deadly secrets. These legends spoke of Pasiphae, the queen who loved a bovine creature, and their monstrous offspring, the Minotaur, imprisoned within an inescapable maze called the Labyrinth. Every 7 years, according to these myths, Athens was forced to send 7 young men and 7 young women to feed this beast, until the hero Theseus finally slayed the monster and escaped using a thread given to him by the king's daughter, Ariadne. These stories preserve distant memories of a real maritime empire that had once dominated the Aegean. The labyrinthine corridors that so captivated later imaginations were not mythical constructions, but actual features of the great centers, whose complex layouts genuinely resembled mazes to foreign visitors. The bovine worship that seemed so exotic to classical Greeks had indeed been central to Cretan beliefs, though the reality was far more sophisticated than the gruesome myths suggested. When Sir Arthur Evans began excavating at Knossos in 1900, he immediately recognized the connection between reality and mythological memory. The twisted passages, the elaborate throne room, the spectacular wall paintings depicting leaping ceremonies, all breathed life into the ancient stories. Evans himself coined the term Minoan for this lost culture, naming it after the legendary King Minos, whose existence had been dismissed as pure fantasy until the spades revealed the undeniable magnificence of his supposed realm. The throne room at Knossos, with its alabaster seat still in place after 3.5 millennia, provided the most dramatic link between myth and reality. Here, surrounded by painted griffins and ritual vessels, a real ruler had once held court in circumstances that must have seemed magical to Bronze Age visitors. The throne itself, carved from gypsum and designed for ritual rather than comfortable seating, spoke to the sacred nature of kingship in this remarkable society. Women held positions of extraordinary authority throughout this culture, far exceeding anything known in later classical antiquity. The numerous goddess figurines, the prominent female figures in wall paintings, and the complete absence of male-dominated warrior imagery all pointed to a society where feminine power was not only accepted, but celebrated. Serpent goddesses, with their hypnotic reptilian companions, commanded reverence in household shrines and major temples alike. The question of political organization remains one of history's most intriguing puzzles. Unlike contemporary states with their clearly identifiable royal burials and military hierarchies, Cretan society left remarkably few traces of individual rulers or dynastic succession. No royal tombs comparable to Egyptian pyramids or Mesopotamian ziggurats have been discovered. This absence suggests that power was distributed more broadly than in typical Bronze Age kingdoms. The society operated as a theocracy, ruled by priest kings who derived authority from sacred rather than military sources. The elaborate ritual chambers found in every major center, the absence of fortifications, and the prominence of ritual objects all support this reality. These rulers governed through religious charisma and economic coordination, rather than through fear and military conquest. The iconography found throughout the centers revealed a complex belief system that defied the anthropomorphic tendencies common in other ancient civilizations. Instead of depicting gods in human form, artists preferred abstract symbols: the double axe, the horns of consecration, the sacred pillar, the tree of life. These symbols appeared on seals, painted walls, pottery, and ritual objects, creating a consistent visual language that communicated sacred concepts across the entire society. Peak temples scattered across the mountainous landscape served as focal points for this distributed belief system. At Juktas, Petsofa, and dozens of other elevated sites, communities gathered to participate in ceremonies that connected local worship with realm-wide traditions. The positioning of these temples created a network of sacred geography that unified diverse regions under shared religious practices. Cave temples provided another dimension to this complex system of worship. The sacred cave at Psychro, traditionally associated with the birth of Zeus in later Greek mythology, contained thousands of votive offerings spanning many centuries. Bronze figurines, ceramic vessels, and precious ornaments left by pilgrims created deposits that documented continuous devotional activity from the earliest periods through the final collapse. At Animosbilia, high on the northern slopes of Mount Juktas, archaeologists discovered the only clear instance of human sacrifice in Crete's long history. In a small temple building, destroyed by earthquake, they found the remains of a young man on an altar, a bronze blade beside his body, and a priest apparently caught in the act of performing the ritual when the building collapsed. This single dramatic discovery stands in stark contrast to the thousands of peaceful religious sites found across the realm, emphasizing just how extraordinary such violence was in this generally harmonious culture. The mystery of undeciphered writing adds another layer of complexity to understanding this society. While scholars can read the numerical systems and recognize some commodity signs in the Linear A script, the grammatical structure and vocabulary remain completely opaque. This linguistic isolation indicates that the inhabitants spoke a language unrelated to any known family, making their script one of the world's great undeciphered writing systems. The tablets revealed a sophisticated bureaucracy that tracked resources, managed distribution, and coordinated activities across hundreds of communities. The precision of these records, combined with the standardized weights and measures found throughout the territory, demonstrated governmental capabilities that would not be matched in Europe for over a millennium. The absence of identifiable military leadership created another puzzle for understanding how this maritime empire maintained its dominance. Cretan rulers left no elaborate warrior burials, no military iconography, and remarkably little evidence for organized warfare or military hierarchy. This peaceful orientation was genuine rather than simply the result of incomplete preservation. Instead of military conquest, the empire expanded through economic attraction and social influence. Communities throughout the Aegean voluntarily adopted architectural styles, decorative motifs, and technological innovations, indicating that membership in the commercial network provided tangible benefits that outweighed any loss of local autonomy. This soft power approach to imperial expansion created a remarkably stable political system that endured for centuries. The comparison with contemporary Bronze Age societies made this peaceful orientation even more remarkable. While Mesopotamian kings boasted of cities destroyed and enemies slaughtered, while Egyptian pharaohs commissioned reliefs showing rows of bound captives, Cretan rulers left visual records celebrating natural beauty, athletic achievement, and religious devotion. This fundamental difference in values shaped every aspect of their remarkable civilization. Trade networks that emerged from this peaceful approach created unprecedented prosperity throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Merchant vessels carried Cretan products to Egypt, Syria, Anatolia, and the Western Mediterranean, while returning with exotic materials that enriched local production centers. Cyprus provided copper, Afghanistan supplied lapis lazuli, and Nubia contributed gold that funded the elaborate court life depicted in wall paintings. Technological innovations that emerged from this prosperous economy revolutionized Bronze Age craftsmanship. Advanced pottery techniques, sophisticated metalworking methods, and innovative construction solutions developed in Cretan production centers spread throughout the Mediterranean world. The peaceful nature of knowledge transmission meant that these innovations could be shared freely rather than hidden as military secrets. Creative traditions reached levels of sophistication unmatched anywhere in the Bronze Age world. The naturalistic wall paintings that decorated ritual chambers captured movement, emotion, and natural beauty with unprecedented skill. Marine life swam across walls with such lifelike quality that viewers could almost hear the splash of waves and feel the ocean breeze. The famous bovine leaping wall paintings provided the most dramatic examples of this achievement, while simultaneously documenting one of history's most extraordinary athletic traditions. Young men and women, their bodies painted in the conventions of Egyptian art, but rendered with distinctly local sensitivity, performed impossible-seeming acrobatic feats that combined religious devotion with physical excellence. These bovine leaping performances were indeed physically possible, though extremely dangerous. Athletes approaching charging animals at full speed would grasp the creature's horns and use the upward momentum of the animal's head to vault completely over its back. The timing required for such performances demanded years of training and absolute fearlessness. The religious significance of these performances related to themes of harmony between human skill and natural power. Rather than depicting domination of animals, the scenes suggested cooperation, humans and bovines participating together in sacred dramas that affirmed cosmic order. This interpretation fits with the broader emphasis on balance and natural harmony evident throughout the visual record. Gender equality in these athletic performances reflected broader patterns of women's participation in public life. Unlike most Bronze Age societies, where women remained largely confined to domestic spheres, Cretan culture encouraged female participation in athletics, religious ceremonies, and possibly governance. The elegant court ladies depicted in wall paintings wore elaborate costumes and jewelry that marked them as persons of high status and authority. The sophisticated urban planning evident in major centers created living environments designed for human comfort and social interaction. Unlike the fortress-like citadels common elsewhere, these complexes welcomed visitors through grand entrances and spacious courtyards. The integration of production areas, governmental quarters, and residential sections within single structures created the world's first true cities, designed for both efficiency and quality of life. Craft specialization reached unprecedented levels within these urban centers. Dedicated production areas for pottery creation, metalworking, textile manufacturing, and stone carving employed hundreds of skilled artisans who focused exclusively on their trades. This specialization enabled the creation of goods whose quality and visual merit would not be equaled in Europe for many centuries. The textile industry, though leaving limited direct traces, must have been extraordinarily sophisticated, judging from the elaborate costumes depicted in wall paintings. The complex patterns, vibrant colors, and elegant draping shown in visual representations required advanced weaving techniques and sophisticated dyeing processes that made Cretan fabrics prized throughout the Mediterranean. Maritime technology developed by local shipwrights enabled the creation of vessels capable of long-distance voyages while maintaining the cargo capacity necessary for profitable trade. The ships, depicted in seals and painted scenes, featured distinctive high prows and sterns that provided stability in rough seas, while creating the graceful lines that made these vessels works of art as well as functional craft. The network of overseas trading posts established by merchants created the ancient world's first truly international commercial system. From the Cycladic archipelago to the Levantine coast, Cretan communities maintained permanent bases that facilitated trade while spreading influence. These overseas settlements served as windows through which local populations could observe and selectively adopt innovations from the advanced homeland. Religious practices that developed during this golden age created some of the most mysterious and beautiful artifacts ever discovered. The serpent goddess figurines, with their elaborate costumes and hypnotic reptilian companions, represented visual and devotional achievements that continue to fascinate modern viewers. These objects, found in household shrines and major temples, spoke to religious traditions that we can admire but never fully understand. The integration of natural and built environments that characterized urban planning reflected deep philosophical commitments to harmony between human activity and natural processes. Gardens, courtyards, and terraces created seamless transitions between interior and exterior spaces, while features like light wells ensured that buildings remained connected to the rhythms of sun and weather. The daily life of ordinary people within this sophisticated society reveals remarkable levels of comfort and social mobility unknown elsewhere in the Bronze Age world. Farmers who worked the terraced hillsides lived in well-built stone houses, with multiple rooms, storage areas, and often their own small shrines dedicated to household deities. The abundance of high-quality pottery, bronze tools, and imported goods found in modest dwellings demonstrates that prosperity extended far beyond elite circles. Children received education that prepared them for specialized roles within the complex economy. Young boys destined for administrative careers learned to read and write the Linear A script in temple schools, mastering the numerical systems and record-keeping techniques that kept the empire functioning. Girls from aristocratic families trained in the elaborate rituals and dances depicted in wall paintings, preparing for roles as priestesses or court officials. The medical knowledge preserved in scattered references and artistic depictions reveals a sophisticated understanding of human anatomy and healing practices. Physicians used bronze surgical instruments to perform complex operations, while herbalists prepared medicines from plants gathered throughout the Mediterranean. The famous saffron gatherer painting from Knossos may actually depict the collection of medicinal crocus, a valuable pharmaceutical ingredient traded across the ancient world. Legal systems, though not fully understood due to the undeciphered script, clearly operated on principles of compensation rather than punishment. The absence of prisons or execution sites in major centers, combined with the peaceful imagery found throughout the realm, suggests that justice focused on restoring social harmony rather than inflicting suffering. Disputes were probably resolved through arbitration by religious authorities who derived their legitimacy from divine rather than military sources. The sophistication of Cretan mathematics becomes apparent through architectural measurements and pottery proportions that demonstrate knowledge of advanced geometric principles. Builders employed mathematical ratios that created pleasing visual harmonies while ensuring structural stability. The famous golden section appears repeatedly in palace proportions, indicating that architects understood aesthetic principles that would later be codified by classical Greek mathematicians. Astronomical knowledge reached impressive levels of accuracy, as demonstrated by the precise orientation of major buildings towards significant celestial events. The Great Hall at Knossos aligns with the summer solstice sunrise, while various temples point toward the rising positions of important stars and constellations. This celestial awareness enabled the creation of accurate calendars that coordinated agricultural activities and religious festivals across the entire realm. Music and dance played central roles in both religious worship and secular entertainment. The numerous lyres, flutes, and percussion instruments found in excavations reveal a rich musical tradition that accompanied the elaborate ceremonies depicted in wall paintings. Professional musicians enjoyed high status within the social hierarchy, as evidenced by their prominent representation in palace art and their burial with valuable instruments. The complexity of Cretan religious thought becomes apparent through the sophisticated symbolism employed in sacred art. The double axe, appearing in countless contexts, symbolized divine power that could both create and destroy. Tree and pillar worship connected earthly communities with cosmic forces, while the labyrinthine patterns found on pottery and seals may have represented spiritual journeys through multiple levels of existence. Foreign visitors to the great centers left accounts that preserved in later Greek literature describe a land of wonder and prosperity that seemed almost magical to contemporary observers. Egyptian traders wrote of palaces that surpassed pharaonic residences in elegance and comfort. Syrian merchants praised the quality of Cretan craftsmanship and the fairness of commercial dealings. These testimonies, filtered through centuries of retelling, contributed to the mythological reputation that would outlast the civilization itself. The role of festivals in maintaining social cohesion cannot be overstated. Seasonal celebrations brought together people from across entire regions, creating opportunities for trade, marriage negotiations, and cultural exchange. The great courtyards of major centers could accommodate thousands of participants in elaborate ceremonies that combined religious devotion with spectacular entertainment. Athletic competitions extended beyond the famous bovine leaping to include boxing, wrestling, and various forms of acrobatic display. Both men and women participated in these contests, which served religious purposes while providing outlets for competitive energy that might otherwise have led to military conflict. The absence of weapons in athletic contexts reinforces the peaceful nature of Cretan society. The influence of Cretan artistic styles on contemporary civilizations demonstrates the prestige and attractiveness of this remarkable culture. Egyptian tomb paintings began incorporating Cretan motifs, while Mesopotamian palaces featured decorative elements clearly inspired by Aegean traditions. This artistic diplomacy helped maintain peaceful relationships with powerful neighbors who might otherwise have viewed the maritime empire as a threat. Environmental management practices developed by Cretan communities show remarkable foresight and ecological awareness. Terraced agriculture prevented soil erosion while maximizing crop yields. Careful forest management ensured sustainable timber supplies for construction and shipbuilding. Marine conservation practices, suggested by the reverent treatment of sea life in artistic representations, may have helped maintain the fish populations that supported coastal communities. The technological innovations that emerged from Cretan laboratories and production centers influenced development across the Mediterranean world. Advanced ceramics, firing techniques produced pottery of exceptional quality and durability. Sophisticated metallurgical methods enabled the creation of bronze alloys with precisely controlled properties for different applications. These innovations spread through trade networks, raising technological standards throughout the region. By the middle of the 16th century, before the Common Era, this remarkable civilization had achieved a level of prosperity, creative achievement, and international influence unmatched anywhere in the Bronze Age world. The great centers hummed with activity as craftsmen created objects of breathtaking beauty. Administrators coordinated economic activity across hundreds of communities, and religious festivals drew pilgrims from distant lands. The peaceful nature of this maritime empire had created an unprecedented period of stability and social flowering. Trade networks carried Cretan influence to every corner of the eastern Mediterranean, while the absence of military pressure allowed local traditions to blend freely with innovations from the sophisticated homeland. This golden age seemed destined to continue indefinitely. Yet forces beyond human control were building toward a catastrophe that would test every assumption about permanence and security. Far to the north, on the volcanic territory that Greeks would later call Thera, geological pressures were approaching a critical threshold. The explosion that would follow would reshape not only the physical landscape of the Aegean, but the entire course of Mediterranean history. 70 miles north of Crete, the island of Thera rose from the deep blue waters of the Aegean like a sleeping giant. For generations, its fertile slopes had supported thriving communities that embodied the pinnacle of achievement. Elaborate houses with sophisticated drainage systems lined paved streets, while magnificent wall paintings depicted dolphins, antelopes, and young boxers in scenes of peaceful prosperity. The inhabitants had no reason to suspect that beneath their feet, one of the most powerful systems on Earth was approaching a catastrophic awakening. The scientific magnitude of what occurred at this location during the late Bronze Age staggers the imagination. The explosivity index rates eruptions on a scale from 0 to 8, with each level representing a 10-fold increase in explosive power. The blast achieved a rating of 6 or 7, comparable to the explosion of Krakatoa in 1883, but potentially much larger. When the climactic phase began, it released energy equivalent to several hundred nuclear weapons detonating simultaneously. The sequence of destruction unfolded over several phases, each more devastating than the last. Initial earthquake swarms shook the region for weeks, causing buildings to crack and residents to flee in growing numbers. These preliminary tremors provided warnings that saved many lives, as archaeologists have found remarkably few human remains in the debris-covered ruins of Crete, the island's major settlement. Pumice and volcanic debris began falling like deadly snow across the southern Aegean. The first explosive phase hurled material high into the atmosphere, where winds carried the fallout across hundreds of miles. Ships caught in the open sea found themselves pelted with hot stones, while coastal communities watched the sky turn black with approaching clouds of superheated particles. The pyroclastic flows that followed represented destruction on an almost incomprehensible scale. These superheated avalanches of gas, debris, and rock fragments raced down the slopes at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour, with temperatures reaching 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Nothing in their path survived. Buildings disintegrated, trees vaporized, and the sea itself boiled where the flows entered the water. The caldera formation that climaxed the catastrophe created a circular depression nearly 6 miles across, as the emptied magma chamber beneath the island could no longer support the overlying rock. The landmass literally fell into itself, creating a geological wound that remains visible today. This process triggered the most destructive phase of the entire event: massive sea waves that radiated outward across the eastern Mediterranean. Geological evidence from across the region documents the giant waves' devastating impact. On Crete's northern coast, marine sediments appear far inland, at elevations that could only have been reached by walls of water of extraordinary height. Coastal settlements that had flourished for centuries simply vanished, their remains scattered by liquid mountains that penetrated miles into river valleys and low-lying plains. The timing of this catastrophe in relation to cultural decline remains one of archaeology's most debated questions. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials from the blast site consistently points to a destruction date around 1600 BC, yet clear evidence for major island decline doesn't appear until several decades later. This apparent contradiction has generated intense scholarly discussion about whether the disaster caused immediate breakdown or initiated a gradual process of weakening that culminated later. Recent analysis suggests that the relationship between natural catastrophe and cultural decline was more complex than simple cause and effect. The northern ports that suffered direct wave damage were quickly rebuilt, indicating that the immediate aftermath did not overwhelm recovery capabilities. However, the blast's broader effects, climate disruption, farming difficulties, and economic shock, may have created cumulative stresses that gradually undermined the society's foundations. The preserved city of Akrotiri provides an extraordinary window into life at the moment of catastrophe. Debris fell so quickly and completely that it created perfect preservation conditions, freezing an entire community in time like a Bronze Age Pompeii. Multi-story houses with elaborate frescoes, advanced plumbing systems, and sophisticated storage facilities reveal the remarkable standard of living achieved in these settlements. The absence of human remains in Akrotiri's ruins tells a story of successful evacuation rather than sudden disaster. Preliminary earthquakes provided enough warning for most residents to flee, taking their most valuable possessions with them. The few artifacts left behind, large storage jars, heavy furniture, and architectural decorations, suggest an orderly abandonment rather than panicked flight. The wall paintings preserved in Akrotiri's houses represent some of the finest achievements of the Bronze Age world. The famous spring fresco depicts swallows darting among blooming lilies in a celebration of natural beauty that epitomizes aesthetic values. The naval procession shows a fleet of ships carrying warriors and civilians between various ports, providing invaluable documentation of maritime life and naval technology. Climate effects from the massive blast extended far beyond the immediate vicinity. Particles injected into the upper atmosphere blocked sunlight across wide regions, causing temperature drops that affected agriculture from Anatolia to Egypt. Chinese records from this period document unusually cold summers, while Irish bog cores show evidence of climatic disruption that may have been caused by winter conditions. The economic shock that followed the disaster reverberated throughout the eastern Mediterranean commercial system. Routes that had operated successfully for centuries were disrupted as key ports suffered damage and shipping became hazardous due to floating pumice and altered coastlines. The sophisticated just-in-time delivery systems that had enabled prosperity proved vulnerable to widespread logistical disruption. Agricultural consequences of the blast may have been particularly severe for Crete's densely populated communities. Fallout, even in relatively light amounts, could render fields unusable for several growing seasons. The island's carefully balanced farming system, which had supported large urban populations through intensive cultivation of limited arable land, proved vulnerable to even temporary disruptions in food production. The psychological impact of such a catastrophic event cannot be underestimated. For a culture that had enjoyed centuries of prosperity and security, the disaster demonstrated the fragility of human achievement in the face of natural forces. The religious implications alone, questioning why the gods had allowed such destruction, may have shaken the spiritual foundations of society. Recovery efforts following the initial catastrophe demonstrate the remarkable resilience of this ancient culture. Evidence shows that many damaged sites were rebuilt, often with improvements that incorporated lessons learned from the disaster. New construction techniques provided better earthquake resistance, while modified urban planning reduced vulnerability to future natural calamities. However, subtle changes in material culture begin appearing in the archaeological record during this period. Pottery styles became less elaborate, with simpler decorative schemes replacing the complex naturalistic motifs of earlier periods. The quality of craftsmanship, while still high by contemporary standards, showed signs of declining resources and reduced ambition. The international prestige that had made this society a respected partner in Mediterranean diplomacy also suffered gradual erosion. Foreign texts from this period show decreasing references to Cretan merchants and diplomatic contacts. The influence that had spread artistic styles and technological innovations throughout the Aegean began to wane as other powers filled the vacuum. Meanwhile, on the Greek mainland, Mycenaean societies were experiencing rapid growth and increasing sophistication. These warrior-dominated communities had long admired and borrowed from island achievements, but they organized their settlements around military rather than commercial principles. As Cretan power weakened, mainland influence expanded to fill the emerging power vacuum. The contrast between island and mainland approaches to governance became increasingly apparent during this period of transition. While Crete continued to rely on economic coordination and religious authority, the mainland societies developed military hierarchies and fortified centers that could respond more effectively to crisis conditions. The peaceful orientation that had been the greatest strength now appeared as a potential weakness. Commercial systems that had been carefully cultivated over centuries began shifting toward mainland centers as Mycenaean merchants proved more aggressive and adaptable than their Cretan counterparts. The gradual reorientation of business relationships reduced the economic foundations of prosperity while strengthening potential rivals who would eventually challenge Cretan dominance directly. Technological innovations that might have helped Crete adapt to changing conditions were instead flowing outward to communities that could offer better security and more reliable partnerships. The peaceful transmission of knowledge that had characterized the Golden Age now worked against the homeland as former students became competitors and eventual successors. Religious practices also showed signs of evolution during this transitional period. The elaborate goddess worship that had characterized classical spirituality gradually incorporated more masculine and militaristic elements, possibly reflecting influence from mainland traditions or adaptation to more dangerous times. The bull-leaping ceremonies that had symbolized harmony between humans and natural forces became less prominent in representations. The palace system that had coordinated the realm for centuries faced increasing challenges as local communities developed greater autonomy. Regional centers that had once deferred to Knossos began making independent decisions about business relationships, defensive arrangements, and resource allocation. This decentralization, while perhaps necessary for local survival, weakened the island-wide coordination that had been crucial to success. Foreign relations became increasingly complex as the traditional Mediterranean balance of power shifted. Egypt, facing its own internal challenges, provided less reliable support for Cretan merchants. Mesopotamian states were experiencing political fragmentation that reduced their demand for luxury goods. The stable international environment that had enabled peaceful expansion was giving way to a more volatile and militaristic age. Evidence from late sites reveals increasing concern with defense and security. Settlements that had previously operated without fortifications began constructing walls and defensive towers. The open architectural style that had characterized buildings gave way to more protected designs that prioritized security over accessibility. The writing system that had coordinated administration also showed signs of stress during this period. Linear A tablets from late contexts reveal simplified recording systems and reduced bureaucratic complexity. The sophisticated resource management that had enabled palace-based coordination was apparently becoming less effective as conditions grew more difficult. Memory of the Great Blast became embedded in later Greek mythology through stories of divine punishment and natural catastrophe. The myth of Deucalion's flood, which describes a world-destroying deluge followed by renewal, may preserve folk memories of the waves that devastated Aegean communities. These stories, filtered through centuries of oral tradition, transformed historical catastrophe into timeless moral lessons. The preserved artistic treasures of Akrotiri continue to provide insights into the sophistication of Bronze Age life. The fisherman fresco shows a young man carrying his catch, painted with such naturalistic detail that individual fish species can be identified. The boxer boys depict athletic competitions that parallel the contests held at major centers, suggesting shared sporting traditions across the Aegean. Environmental changes following the catastrophe affected wildlife populations and natural resources throughout the region. Forest ecosystems disrupted by falling debris took decades to recover, limiting timber supplies essential for shipbuilding and construction. Marine life populations, stressed by the physical and chemical changes in seawater, may have reduced the fishing yields that supported coastal communities. The gradual shift in pottery styles during this period reflects changing aesthetic preferences and possibly reduced artistic training. The flowing, naturalistic designs that had characterized the Golden Age gave way to more geometric patterns that were easier to execute, but lacked the sophisticated naturalism of earlier work. This artistic decline paralleled broader cultural changes throughout the region. By 1500 BC, roughly a century after the Great Disaster, the culture remained impressive by any objective standard, but had clearly passed its peak of power and influence. The great palaces still functioned, commercial routes still operated, and production continued at high levels. However, the conditions that had enabled 4 centuries of unprecedented prosperity were gradually changing in ways that would soon prove irreversible. The stage was being set for the final phase of independent rule. To the north, Mycenaean societies were developing the military capabilities and political organization necessary for territorial conquest. The peaceful maritime empire that had dominated the Aegean through economic attraction and influence was about to face challenges that would test whether its fundamental values could survive in an increasingly militaristic world. The blast had not destroyed the culture directly, but it had initiated a cascade of changes that gradually undermined the foundations of Aegean prosperity. What followed would demonstrate both the remarkable resilience of this ancient society and the ultimate fragility of any human achievement when confronted by forces beyond its control. The signs of fundamental change appeared gradually across Crete during the 15th century before the Common Era. Where once linear A tablets had recorded the sophisticated transactions of a peaceful maritime empire, a new script began appearing in administrative centers. Linear B, a writing system that recorded an entirely different language. The transformation was subtle at first, confined to certain governmental buildings and official records, but it marked the beginning of the end for independent rule on the territory that had birthed Europe's first great society. Archaeological layers from this period tell a story of conquest disguised as evolution. The pottery styles that emerged during these decades known to scholars as Late Minoan 2b, showed fundamental departures from established aesthetics. Gone were the flowing, naturalistic designs that had celebrated marine life and natural beauty. In their place appeared geometric patterns, stylized warriors, and decorative motifs that clearly reflected mainland Greek influences. The mainland Greeks had arrived not as crude barbarians overwhelming a sophisticated society, but as ambitious students who had learned their lessons too well. For centuries, they had admired and absorbed the achievements of their neighbors, the architectural innovations, the artistic techniques, the commercial practices that had made Crete the envy of the Bronze Age world. Now, with armed organization that the peaceful inhabitants could not match, they came to claim their inheritance. The takeover appears to have been remarkably bloodless, at least in its initial phases. No burned destruction layers mark the transition at major centers. No mass graves document resistance and slaughter. Instead, the evidence points to a gradual assumption of control by mainland administrators who understood the value of preserving the economic and social systems they were acquiring. The Greeks were conquerors, but they were also pragmatists who recognized that destroyed infrastructure served no one's interests. Knossos, the greatest of the ceremonial centers, experienced the most dramatic transformation. The throne room that had once hosted priest-kings, ruling through spiritual authority, now welcomed warrior chiefs whose power derived from bronze weapons and armed organization. The Linear B tablets found in the archives record a completely different administrative philosophy, one focused on weapons, chariot maintenance, and tribute collection, rather than the peaceful resource coordination of earlier centuries. The new rulers adapted existing structures to serve their purposes, while gradually imposing their own preferences. The elaborate religious ceremonies that had characterized earlier life continued, but with modified elements that reflected mainland spiritual practices. Bull-leaping performances still took place in the great courtyards, but they shared space with martial displays and reviews that would have been foreign to earlier times. Evidence for the nature of this transition, whether peaceful absorption or violent conquest, remains frustratingly ambiguous. Some sites show clear signs of destruction and abandonment during this period, suggesting armed resistance and forcible occupation. Others display continuity in material customs and architectural use, indicating negotiated transitions or collaborative arrangements. The truth probably varied from location to location, depending on local circumstances and the attitudes of both conquerors and conquered. The transformation of written records provides the clearest evidence for changing political control. Linear A, with its mysterious language and sophisticated administrative terminology, disappeared from official use within a few decades of the Greek arrival. Linear B, recording the language of the mainland conquerors, became the standard script for governmental business. This linguistic shift marked more than administrative convenience. It represented a fundamental change in the identity of the ruling class. The administrative efficiency that characterized mainland governance reflected centuries of observation and learning from their predecessors. The new rulers maintained many existing economic systems, while adapting them to serve martial rather than commercial priorities. Craft workshops continued producing high-quality goods, but increasing proportions of their output went toward weapons, armor, and equipment, rather than the luxury items that had once filled international markets. Religious practices underwent gradual but significant modifications as mainland influences grew stronger. The goddess-centered spirituality that had dominated established beliefs gave way to more masculine and militaristic religious elements. Warrior deities began appearing in artistic representations, while the peaceful nature imagery that had characterized earlier religious art became less prominent in ceremonial contexts. The international relationships that had sustained the maritime empire for centuries gradually withered as Greek priorities replaced established diplomatic approaches. Egyptian texts from this period show declining references to Cretan merchants and exchanges. The sophisticated commercial networks that had carried products throughout the Mediterranean began reorienting toward mainland centers that could offer better protection and more aggressive business practices. Local resistance to the new order probably occurred in many areas, though the archaeological record preserves limited evidence of organized opposition. The peaceful customs that had characterized society for centuries provided little preparation for armed resistance against well-organized warrior societies. Communities that had thrived through cooperation and economic coordination found themselves poorly equipped to resist conquest by societies organized around warfare and territorial expansion. The gradual abandonment of established sites during this period reflects both political pressures and changing economic conditions. Settlements that had flourished under the old system of peaceful commercial coordination became less viable under new arrangements that prioritized martial considerations over economic efficiency. Many communities simply faded away as their inhabitants migrated to areas that offered better opportunities under the changed circumstances. Survival took various forms as the new order consolidated its control. Some established practices continued in modified forms that satisfied both old customs and new political requirements. Others retreated to rural areas and household contexts where they could persist without challenging the authority of the new rulers. The most adaptable elements of the old society found ways to blend with mainland influences, creating hybrid arrangements that preserved essential elements while accommodating political realities. The quality of artistic production began declining during this period, though the changes were subtle and gradual rather than dramatic. The sophisticated naturalism that had characterized the Golden Age gave way to more stylized and conventional approaches that reflected reduced training and possibly changed aesthetic preferences. The international markets that had once demanded the highest quality craftsmanship were no longer accessible to producers operating under the new political arrangements. Agricultural systems experienced significant modifications as new priorities took precedence over established practices. The careful environmental management that had sustained intensive cultivation for centuries gave way to more exploitative approaches focused on maximizing short-term yields to support armed activities. Terraced fields that had prevented erosion for generations began showing signs of neglect as labor was diverted to other purposes. The ceremonial system that had coordinated activities for half a millennium gradually lost its integrative function. Regional centers that had once cooperated through the Knossos-based hierarchy increasingly operated as independent entities under local strongmen who owed allegiance to mainland overlords rather than established authorities. This fragmentation weakened the economic coordination that had been essential to earlier prosperity. By 1400 BC, the transformation was largely complete. The great centers still functioned, but they served new masters with different priorities and values. The peaceful maritime empire that had dominated the Aegean for 4 centuries had been absorbed into a wider Greek world that operated according to very different principles. Established customs survived in modified forms, but the independent political identity that had sustained them was gone forever. The broader Mediterranean context during this period helps explain why the transition occurred when it did. The Sea Peoples, mysterious maritime raiders whose identity remains debated, were beginning to disrupt established commercial patterns throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. Egyptian power was contracting under pressure from various threats, reducing the stability that had enabled peaceful business relationships. The international environment that had favored diplomatic and economic approaches to power was giving way to a more militaristic age. Greek rule brought certain benefits to the communities, particularly in terms of security and protection. The new rulers could defend their territories more effectively than the old peaceful administrators had been able to do. Commercial relationships, while changed in character, continued to bring prosperity to many areas. The administrative efficiency of the new system enabled effective resource management even under more challenging conditions. However, the costs of the transition were also significant. The creativity that had flourished under the old system declined as resources were diverted to martial purposes. The international prestige that had made the territory a respected center gradually transferred to mainland Greek centers. The environmental sustainability that had characterized established practices gave way to more exploitative approaches that stored up problems for the future. The preservation of established elements within the new system varied considerably across different areas and social levels. Elite families who could adapt to new political realities often maintained their status by collaborating with the new rulers. Craft specialists whose skills remained valuable found ways to continue their work under changed circumstances. Rural communities, less directly affected by political changes, preserved many established practices in modified forms. The linguistic transformation that accompanied political conquest had profound implications. As Greek became the administrative language, established terminology for religious, social, and economic concepts gradually disappeared from official use. The sophisticated vocabulary that had described the complexities of peaceful governance was replaced by terms more suited to martial administration and territorial control. Religious architecture continued to serve community needs, but with modified purposes and altered decorative schemes. Temples that had once focused on goddess worship increasingly featured warrior deities and martial imagery. The bull symbols that had dominated established religious art remained important but were joined by spears, shields, and other martial emblems that reflected the changed political atmosphere. The international reputation of the territory gradually shifted from that of a peaceful commercial center to a well-administered but militarized province of a mainland empire. Foreign visitors who had once come to admire unique artistic achievements and sophisticated urban planning now found a society that, while still prosperous, had lost much of its distinctive character. By the 13th century BC, even these modified arrangements were facing new challenges. The broader breakdown of Bronze Age society that affected the entire Eastern Mediterranean was beginning to impact Greek territories. The ceremonial system that had been adapted rather than destroyed by the conquest was now facing pressures that would prove beyond its capacity to handle. The Sea Peoples, whose raids had been a distant threat during the early Greek period, were now attacking Mediterranean coastlines with increasing frequency and effectiveness. The commercial networks that had sustained both established and modified economies were breaking down under the pressure of widespread piracy and political instability. The administrative systems that had coordinated resources across wide territories were proving inadequate to handle the unprecedented challenges of systemic breakdown. Climate change during this period added environmental pressures to political and martial challenges. Extended droughts affected agricultural production across the Mediterranean region, while rising sea levels altered coastal geography and disrupted established settlements. The carefully balanced resource management that had sustained dense populations for centuries was breaking down under multiple simultaneous stresses. The final abandonment of the great centers occurred gradually over several decades, rather than in a single catastrophic event. Knossos, which had survived conquest and adaptation, finally fell silent around 1370 BC, as its last administrators fled or died defending their positions. Other centers followed suit as the entire ceremonial system of government and economic coordination dissolved throughout the Greek world. The end came not with the dramatic destruction that had characterized some earlier transitions, but with a whimper of abandonment and decay. The great halls that had once hosted elaborate ceremonies stood empty as roofs collapsed and weeds grew through the paving stones. The sophisticated storage systems that had coordinated regional economics gradually filled with debris as no one remained to maintain them. Rural communities, less dependent on the ceremonial system, survived longer than the urban centers. Some established practices persisted in isolated areas for centuries after the great centers had been abandoned. However, the integrated society that had once unified the entire territory was gone forever, leaving only scattered fragments of what had once been Europe's first great achievement. The memory of what had been accomplished would persist in the myths and legends that later Greeks would weave around the ruins they found on Crete. The Labyrinth, the Minotaur, King Minos, and his maritime empire. These stories preserved distant echoes of real achievements, even as they transformed historical reality into timeless legend. The society was gone, but its legacy would endure in the collective memory of Mediterranean peoples for millennia to come. Part 6. Atlantis, Plato's vision and the Minoan hypothesis, circa 400 BC onward. 9,000 years before his time, according to the great Athenian philosopher, there existed a realm of extraordinary power and sophistication. This society, called Atlantis, commanded fleets that dominated the Mediterranean and Atlantic, while its capital city displayed architectural marvels that surpassed anything in the known world. The inhabitants possessed advanced technology, accumulated vast wealth through commerce, and created art of unsurpassed beauty. Yet their very success contained the seeds of their destruction. As power corrupted their noble nature, the gods struck down their domain in a single day and night of earthquakes and floods. The philosopher presented this tale in two of his dialogues, the Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BC. According to his account, the story had been preserved in Egyptian temple records and transmitted to Greece through Solon, the great lawgiver who had travelled to Egypt 2 centuries earlier. The priests of Sais, keepers of ancient wisdom, had shared this cautionary tale with the visiting Greek, who brought it back to Athens, where it passed through his family until it reached the writer's generation. Most scholars in ancient times, and for centuries afterward, regarded the lost civilization as a moral allegory rather than historical reality. The story served philosophical purposes perfectly, illustrating how even the most advanced societies could fall victim to hubris and moral decay. The detailed descriptions of government, geography, and customs provided examples for discussing ideal political arrangements and the relationship between virtue and power. The numerical precision of the account, placing the vanished realm exactly 9,000 years in the past, suggests symbolic rather than literal chronology. This time frame positioned the lost domain in a mythical golden age, far enough removed from historical memory to serve as a perfect canvas for philosophical speculation. The number 9 held special significance in ancient numerology, while the multiplication by 1,000 emphasized the vast temporal distance between the idealized past and the author's present. Yet within the detailed descriptions lay elements that would later strike researchers as remarkably specific and internally consistent. The circular layout, with alternating rings of land and water connected by bridges and tunnels, resembled sophisticated urban planning rather than pure fantasy. The account of naval power, commercial networks, and technological achievements painted a picture of prehistoric maritime dominance that seemed almost too detailed to be entirely imaginary. The geography described in the dialogues placed the lost land beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the modern Strait of Gibraltar in the Atlantic Ocean. The territory was said to be larger than Libya and Asia combined, with a capital city featuring harbours, temples, and royal structures of extraordinary magnificence. Concentric rings of water and land created natural defences while facilitating commerce, and an elaborate system of canals connected the capital to the sea. The description of society emphasized both achievement and moral decline. Initially virtuous and divinely guided, the inhabitants had created a just and prosperous realm that commanded respect throughout the ancient world. Their maritime expertise enabled them to establish colonies and trading posts across the Mediterranean, while their advanced agriculture supported large populations in comfort and security. However, as generations passed and divine blood became diluted through intermarriage with mortals, the people grew proud and acquisitive. Their noble nature corrupted by material success, they began launching wars of conquest against their neighbors. When they threatened Athens and Egypt with invasion, the gods intervened to prevent their triumph, destroying their homeland in a catastrophic natural disaster that left no trace save memory. The Egyptian source that the philosopher claimed for his story adds another layer of complexity to the puzzle. Ancient Egypt possessed the longest historical records of any Mediterranean power, with temple archives stretching back thousands of years. If Egyptian priests had indeed preserved accounts of a vanished naval power, these records might represent genuine historical memory, filtered through centuries of retelling and interpretation. Solon's journey to Egypt, mentioned in several ancient sources, provides a plausible mechanism for the story's transmission to Greece. The great Athenian statesman spent years studying Egyptian law, religion, and history during his travels. His reputation for wisdom and integrity made him exactly the sort of visitor whom Egyptian priests might honor, with access to their most ancient and sacred records. The question of whether the tale was invented entirely or drew upon existing traditions has fascinated scholars for over 2 millennia. References to lost lands and vanished peoples appear in various ancient sources, suggesting that stories of disappeared realms circulated widely in the Mediterranean world. The philosopher may have synthesized these traditions with his own insights to create the narrative. For nearly 2,000 years, the lost civilization remained primarily a subject for philosophical reflection, rather than archaeological investigation. Medieval and Renaissance writers occasionally speculated about its possible location, but without the scientific tools necessary for serious research, such discussions remained largely theoretical. The story served mainly as a source of moral instruction and literary inspiration. The development of modern archaeology during the 19th and early 20th centuries changed this situation dramatically. As excavations revealed the genuine achievements of prehistoric societies, the possibility that the account might contain historical elements gained new credibility. The Discovery of Troy by Heinrich Schliemann demonstrated that literary sources once dismissed as pure myth could preserve authentic historical memories. The excavation of Knossos by Sir Arthur Evans, beginning in 1900, provided the first concrete evidence for a prehistoric naval power that matched many aspects of the description. The sophisticated architecture, advanced technology, and peaceful prosperity of the culture Evans called Minoan seemed to echo themes from the narrative. Could this lost realm have been the historical reality behind the philosophical allegory? The similarities between the described civilization and archaeological records are indeed striking. Both accounts describe territory-based naval powers that achieved unprecedented prosperity through commerce rather than conquest. Both emphasize sophisticated architecture, advanced technology, and artistic achievements that impressed contemporary observers. Both mention sudden destruction that ended these remarkable societies abruptly. The timeline discrepancy, the philosopher's 9,000 years versus the actual prehistoric chronology, might reflect confusion between Egyptian and Greek calendar systems. Egyptian records used lunar months rather than solar years for certain calculations, potentially creating a 10-to-1 ratio error that would place the 2450 BCE destruction around 1500 BC rather than 9600 BC. This adjusted chronology corresponds remarkably well with evidence for major disruptions in the prehistoric Aegean. The volcanic destruction of Thera provides a plausible natural mechanism for the catastrophic end that the account attributed to divine intervention. The massive explosion, tsunamis, and climate effects documented by modern science match the scale of destruction described in the narrative. The sudden disappearance of a major Aegean territory would have created exactly the sort of dramatic geological event that could inspire stories of divine punishment. The description of naval power resonates strongly with evidence for extensive maritime networks during the prehistoric period. The ability to project power across the Mediterranean, establish overseas colonies, and maintain complex commercial relationships all characterize the archaeological record of Aegean societies. The emphasis on peaceful prosperity rather than military conquest also matches the evidence from major centers. Artistic and technological achievements attributed to the lost people find parallels in prehistoric discoveries. The sophisticated urban planning, advanced hydraulic engineering, and artistic sophistication documented at sites like Knossos and Akrotiri demonstrate the reality of ancient achievements that the philosophers' contemporaries might have considered fantastical. The peaceful nature imagery and marine motifs that characterized art seem particularly relevant to the maritime character described. However, significant problems complicate any direct identification with archaeological evidence. The geographical specifications, a territory larger than Libya and Asia, located beyond Gibraltar, cannot be reconciled with any known prehistoric site. The political and military details in the account reflect classical Greek rather than ancient governmental structures. The philosophical themes that dominate the narrative suggest allegorical rather than historical purposes. Alternative explanations for the story continue to proliferate, with proposed locations ranging from the Black Sea to Antarctica. Most of these theories require selective interpretation of the text and ignore aspects that don't fit their preferred scenarios. The enduring appeal of the Lost Paradise seems to inspire more wishful thinking than rigorous analysis among many amateur researchers. Serious scholarship on the connection generally focuses on the possibility that the philosopher incorporated genuine historical memories into a primarily philosophical narrative, rather than attempting literal identification with specific archaeological sites. This approach examines how prehistoric realities might have influenced later Greek traditions that could have been encountered and adapted for philosophical purposes. The theory that stories of ancient naval powers survived in Egyptian records and influenced the account remains plausible, though unproven. Egyptian contacts with Aegean societies are well documented, and the long institutional memory of Egyptian temple organizations could have preserved accounts of major historical events. The priests of Sais, mentioned in the narrative, were indeed keepers of ancient traditions and historical records, Folk memories of prehistoric catastrophes often survive in mythological form long after the original events have been forgotten. The biblical flood narrative, Mesopotamian deluge stories, and Greek tales of world-destroying disasters may all preserve cultural memories of actual geological or climatic catastrophes. The account of destruction could represent a similar preservation of ancient historical memory. The psychological appeal of the story helps explain its endurance across diverse eras and societies. The image of a lost golden age destroyed by its own success resonates with universal human experiences of loss, change, and moral decline. Every generation finds contemporary relevance in the tale of advanced society that collapsed through hubris and corruption. Modern scientific analysis of the text reveals internal inconsistencies that support allegorical rather than historical interpretation. The numerical details, geographical specifications, and cultural descriptions contain elements that seem designed to serve philosophical arguments rather than preserve historical accuracy. The story's primary function appears to be illustrating timeless themes about power, virtue, and divine justice. Nevertheless, the possibility that historical memories influence the narrative cannot be dismissed entirely. The remarkable achievements documented by prehistoric archaeology demonstrate that ancient societies achieved levels of sophistication that classical Greeks might have considered almost supernatural. Stories of such achievements, preserved in Egyptian records and transmitted through Greek tradition, could have provided the factual foundation for philosophical elaboration. The debate over historical reality reflects broader questions about the relationship between myth and memory, literature and archaeology, philosophy and history. While definitive proof for any specific identification remains elusive, the discussion has contributed valuable insights into prehistoric achievements and the mechanisms by which historical memories transform into cultural narratives. The enduring fascination ensures that new theories and interpretations will continue emerging as archaeological knowledge expands and analytical techniques improve. Whether the philosopher drew upon genuine historical traditions or created his narrative entirely from imagination, the story has succeeded in its apparent primary purpose, inspiring reflection on the relationship between human achievement and moral responsibility. The connection between the lost civilization and prehistoric naval powers illuminates both the achievements of ancient societies and the power of narrative to preserve cultural memory across millennia. Even if no direct historical relationship can be established, the parallels between the literary vision and archaeological reality demonstrate how human imagination and historical experience can combine to create stories of enduring significance and compelling power. 9,000 years before his time, according to the great Athenian philosopher, there existed a realm of extraordinary power and sophistication. This society, called Atlantis, commanded fleets that dominated the Mediterranean and Atlantic, while its capital city displayed architectural marvels that surpassed anything in the known world. The inhabitants possessed advanced technology, accumulated vast wealth through commerce, and created art of unsurpassed beauty. Yet their very success contained the seeds of their destruction. As power corrupted their noble nature, the gods struck down their domain in a single day and night of earthquakes and floods. The philosopher presented this tale in two of his dialogues, the Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BC. According to his account, the story had been preserved in Egyptian temple records and transmitted to Greece through Solon, the great lawgiver who had traveled to Egypt 2 centuries earlier. The priests of Sais, keepers of ancient wisdom, had shared this cautionary tale with the visiting Greek, who brought it back to Athens, where it passed through his family until it reached the writer's generation. Most scholars, in ancient times and for centuries afterward, regarded the lost civilization as a moral allegory rather than historical reality. The story served philosophical purposes perfectly, illustrating how even the most advanced societies could fall victim to hubris and moral decay. The detailed descriptions of government, geography, and customs provided examples for discussing ideal political arrangements and the relationship between virtue and power. The numerical precision of the account, placing the vanished realm exactly 9,000 years in the past, suggests symbolic rather than literal chronology. This time frame positioned the lost domain in a mythical golden age, far enough removed from historical memory to serve as a perfect canvas for philosophical speculation. The number 9 held special significance in ancient numerology, while the multiplication by 1,000 emphasized the vast temporal distance between the idealized past and the author's present. Yet within the detailed descriptions lay elements that would later strike researchers as remarkably specific and internally consistent. The circular layout, with alternating rings of land and water connected by bridges and tunnels, resembled sophisticated urban planning rather than pure fantasy. The account of naval power, commercial networks, and technological achievements painted a picture of prehistoric maritime dominance that seemed almost too detailed to be entirely imaginary. The geography described in the dialogues placed the lost land beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the modern Strait of Gibraltar, in the Atlantic Ocean. The territory was said to be larger than Libya and Asia combined, with a capital city featuring harbours, temples, and royal structures of extraordinary magnificence. Concentric rings of water and land created natural defences while facilitating commerce, and an elaborate system of canals connected the capital to the sea. The description of society emphasized both achievement and moral decline. Initially virtuous and divinely guided, the inhabitants had created a just and prosperous realm that commanded respect throughout the ancient world. Their maritime expertise enabled them to establish colonies and trading posts across the Mediterranean, while their advanced agriculture supported large populations in comfort and security. However, as generations passed and divine blood became diluted through intermarriage with mortals, the people grew proud and acquisitive. Their noble nature corrupted by material success, they began launching wars of conquest against their neighbors. When they threatened Athens and Egypt with invasion, the gods intervened to prevent their triumph, destroying their homeland in a catastrophic natural disaster that left no trace save memory. The Egyptian source that the philosopher claimed for his story adds another layer of complexity to the puzzle. Ancient Egypt possessed the longest historical records of any Mediterranean power, with temple archives stretching back thousands of years. If Egyptian priests had indeed preserved accounts of a vanished naval power, these records might represent genuine historical memory, filtered through centuries of retelling and interpretation. Solon's journey to Egypt, mentioned in several ancient sources, provides a plausible mechanism for the story's transmission to Greece. The great Athenian statesman spent years studying Egyptian law, religion, and history during his travels. His reputation for wisdom and integrity made him exactly the sort of visitor whom Egyptian priests might honor with access to their most ancient and sacred records. The question of whether the tale was invented entirely or drew upon existing traditions has fascinated scholars for over 2 millennia. References to lost lands and vanished peoples appear in various ancient sources, suggesting that stories of disappeared realms circulated widely in the Mediterranean world. The philosopher may have synthesized these traditions with his own insights to create the narrative. For nearly 2,000 years, the lost civilization remained primarily a subject for philosophical reflection rather than archaeological investigation. Medieval and Renaissance writers occasionally speculated about its possible location, but without the scientific tools necessary for serious research, such discussions remained largely theoretical. The story served mainly as a source of moral instruction and literary inspiration. The development of modern archaeology during the 19th and early 20th centuries changed this situation dramatically. As excavations revealed the genuine achievements of prehistoric societies, the possibility that the account might contain historical elements gained new credibility. The discovery of Troy by Heinrich Schliemann demonstrated that literary sources once dismissed as pure myth could preserve authentic historical memories. The excavation of Knossos by Sir Arthur Evans, beginning in 1900, provided the first concrete evidence for a prehistoric naval power that matched many aspects of the description. The sophisticated architecture, advanced technology, and peaceful prosperity of the culture Evans called Minoan seemed to echo themes from the narrative. Could this lost realm have been the historical reality behind the philosophical allegory? The similarities between the described civilization and archaeological records are indeed striking. Both accounts describe territory-based naval powers that achieved unprecedented prosperity through commerce rather than conquest. Both emphasize sophisticated architecture, advanced technology, and artistic achievements that impressed contemporary observers. Both mention sudden destruction that ended these remarkable societies abruptly. The timeline discrepancy, the philosopher's 9,000 years versus the actual prehistoric chronology, might reflect confusion between Egyptian and Greek calendar systems. Egyptian records used lunar months rather than solar years for certain calculations, potentially creating a 10-to-1 ratio error that would place the 2450 BCE destruction around 1500 BC rather than 9600 BC. This adjusted chronology corresponds remarkably well with evidence for major disruptions in the prehistoric Aegean. The volcanic destruction of Thera provides a plausible natural mechanism for the catastrophic end that the account attributed to divine intervention. The massive explosion, tsunamis, and climate effects documented by modern science match the scale of destruction described in the narrative. The sudden disappearance of a major Aegean territory would have created exactly the sort of dramatic geological event that could inspire stories of divine punishment. The description of naval power resonates strongly with evidence for extensive maritime networks during the prehistoric period. The ability to project power across the Mediterranean, establish overseas colonies, and maintain complex commercial relationships all characterize the archaeological record of Aegean societies. The emphasis on peaceful prosperity rather than military conquest also matches the evidence from major centers. Artistic and technological achievements attributed to the lost people find parallels in prehistoric discoveries. The sophisticated urban planning, advanced hydraulic engineering, and artistic sophistication documented at sites like Knossos and Akrotiri demonstrate the reality of ancient achievements that the philosophers' contemporaries might have considered fantastical. The peaceful nature imagery and marine motifs that characterized art seem particularly relevant to the maritime character described. However, significant problems complicate any direct identification with archaeological evidence. The geographical specifications, a territory larger than Libya and Asia located beyond Gibraltar, cannot be reconciled with any known prehistoric site. The political and military details in the account reflect classical Greek rather than ancient governmental structures. The philosophical themes that dominate the narrative suggest allegorical rather than historical purposes. Alternative explanations for the story continue to proliferate, with proposed locations ranging from the Black Sea to Antarctica. Most of these theories require selective interpretation of the text and ignore aspects that don't fit their preferred scenarios. The enduring appeal of the lost paradise seems to inspire more wishful thinking than rigorous analysis among many amateur researchers. Serious scholarship on the connection generally focuses on the possibility that the philosopher incorporated genuine historical memories into a primarily philosophical narrative, rather than attempting literal identification with specific archaeological sites. This approach examines how prehistoric realities might have influenced later Greek traditions that could have been encountered and adapted for philosophical purposes. The theory that stories of ancient naval powers survived in Egyptian records and influenced the account remains plausible, though unproven. Egyptian contacts with Aegean societies are well documented, and the long institutional memory of Egyptian temple organizations could have preserved accounts of major historical events. The priests of Sais, mentioned in the narrative, were indeed keepers of ancient traditions and historical records. Folk memories of prehistoric catastrophes often survive in mythological form long after the original events have been forgotten. The biblical flood narrative, Mesopotamian deluge stories, and Greek tales of world-destroying disasters may all preserve cultural memories of actual geological or climatic catastrophes. The account of destruction could represent a similar preservation of ancient historical memory. The psychological appeal of the story helps explain its endurance across diverse eras and societies. The image of a lost golden age destroyed by its own success resonates with universal human experiences of loss, change, and moral decline. Every generation finds contemporary relevance in the tale of advanced society that collapsed through hubris and corruption. Modern scientific analysis of the text reveals internal inconsistencies that support allegorical rather than historical interpretation. The numerical details, geographical specifications, and cultural descriptions contain elements that seem designed to serve philosophical arguments rather than preserve historical accuracy. The story's primary function appears to be illustrating timeless themes about power, virtue, and divine justice. Nevertheless, the possibility that historical memories influenced the narrative cannot be dismissed entirely. The remarkable achievements documented by prehistoric archaeology demonstrate that ancient societies achieved levels of sophistication that classical Greeks might have considered almost supernatural. Stories of such achievements, preserved in Egyptian records and transmitted through Greek tradition, could have provided the factual foundation for philosophical elaboration. The debate over historical reality reflects broader questions about the relationship between myth and memory, literature and archaeology, philosophy and history. While definitive proof for any specific identification remains elusive, the discussion has contributed valuable insights into prehistoric achievements and the mechanisms by which historical memories transform into cultural narratives. The enduring fascination ensures that new theories and interpretations will continue emerging as archaeological knowledge expands and analytical techniques improve. Whether the philosopher drew upon genuine historical traditions or created his narrative entirely from imagination, the story has succeeded in its apparent primary purpose, inspiring reflection on the relationship between human achievement and moral responsibility. The connection between the lost civilization and prehistoric naval powers illuminates both the achievements of ancient societies and the power of narrative to preserve cultural memory across millennia. Even if no direct historical relationship can be established, The parallels between the literary vision and archaeological reality demonstrate how human imagination and historical experience can combine to create stories of enduring significance and compelling power. On a spring morning in 1900, a young British archaeologist named Arthur Evans stood amid the olive groves of Crete, holding fragments of ancient script that would change our understanding of European prehistory forever. The mysterious symbols carved into tiny seal stones had captivated him during visits to antiquities dealers in Athens, but their meaning remained locked in silence. Now, having purchased the site where local farmers had been finding these artifacts, the scholar was about to uncover evidence of a realm that had vanished so completely from historical memory that even the Greeks had forgotten its existence. The first season of excavation at the ancient center revealed wonders that exceeded the archaeologist's most optimistic expectations. Within weeks, his workmen had uncovered elaborate frescoes depicting elegant court ladies and athletic young men performing impossible acrobatic feats with charging bulls. Massive storage rooms filled with enormous clay jars spoke of an economic system operating on a scale previously unknown in European prehistory. Most remarkably, the building techniques displayed a sophistication that challenged every assumption about the primitive nature of ancient life. The restoration of what the team found became almost as famous as the original finds themselves. Working with limited techniques by modern standards, the excavator made decisions that would generate controversy for over a century. Concrete pillars replaced wooden ones that had rotted away. Bright red paint recreated faded frescoes based on tiny surviving fragments. Steel reinforcements supported rebuilt walls that might otherwise have collapsed under their own weight. The restored throne room at the Great Palace, with its gypsum seats surrounded by recreated griffin frescoes, became an icon of ancient sophistication. Visitors could walk through ancient corridors and imagine themselves in a prehistoric court, but they were experiencing the scholar's interpretation as much as genuine antiquity. The concrete used in rebuilding bore little resemblance to the original building materials, while the visual recreations often filled large gaps with educated guesswork. Critics of the restoration methods argued that the team had created a Disneyland version of the past, more reflective of early 20th century romantic imagination than historical reality. The vivid colors and dramatic features that impressed tourists might bear little resemblance to the subdued tones and weathered surfaces that actually characterized the ancient structures. His restorations, they claimed, told us more about Edwardian aesthetics than prehistoric sensibilities. Defenders of the approach countered that these bold interpretations brought the ancient world to life in ways that mere fragments could never achieve. Without these recreations, they argued, visitors would see only broken stones and faded plaster that conveyed little sense of the realm's achievements. The educational value of experiencing rebuilt spaces, even if imperfect, outweighed the purists' concerns about authenticity. The timing of these revelations coincided with a broader transformation in European consciousness. The early 20th century was an era of questioning traditional assumptions about progress and the relationship between ancient and modern achievements. The revelation that sophisticated societies had flourished in prehistoric Europe challenged linear narratives that placed classical Greece at the beginning of European development. Nationalist movements across Europe seized upon the finds as evidence for their own antiquity and distinctiveness. Greek intellectuals embraced the ancient inhabitants as proof of Hellenic continuity, stretching back to the prehistoric era. British scholars emphasized the role of English scholarship in revealing this lost heritage. German researchers developed complex theories about Indo-European migrations and racial characteristics based on visual evidence from the excavations. The influence of these revelations on early 20th century creativity and literature was profound and immediate. Modernist painters found inspiration in the flowing lines and naturalistic representations that contrasted sharply with the rigid conventions of classical traditions. Art Nouveau designers incorporated ancient motifs into decorative schemes for buildings, furniture, and fashion. The serpent priestess figurines became symbols of feminine power and ancient wisdom that resonated with changing gender roles. Literary movements embraced the ancient inhabitants as representatives of a lost golden age that offered alternatives to industrial modernity's perceived spiritual poverty. Writers like H.D. and Robert Graves drew upon imagery to explore themes of divine feminine worship, matriarchal organization, and humanity's connection to natural forces. The peaceful, art-loving realm that the excavator described provided a compelling contrast to the militaristic societies that were plunging Europe into unprecedented warfare. Female-centered interpretations of the ancient way of life emerged almost immediately after the initial revelations. The prominent role of female deities in religious imagery, the apparent equality of women in social scenes, and the absence of obvious patriarchal symbols suggested to some observers that this had been a realm where feminine values dominated. The serpent priestess figurines, with their confident posture and commanding presence, became icons of female empowerment and spiritual authority. These female-centered readings of the evidence often extended beyond what the artifacts could actually support. The assumption that divine feminine worship implied matriarchal political organization, for example, reflected modern ideological preferences rather than careful analysis of prehistoric social structures. The elegant court ladies in frescoes might represent elite women enjoying high status within a fundamentally patriarchal system rather than evidence for female political dominance. Nevertheless, the image of ancient women as powerful, independent, and spiritually significant has persisted in popular understanding and academic discourse. Whether historically accurate or not, this interpretation has provided inspiration for movements emphasizing female empowerment and alternative spiritual practices that honor divine feminine wisdom. The ancient inhabitants became symbols of what human communities might achieve when feminine values are honored alongside masculine ones. Excavation techniques developed dramatically in the decades following the pioneering work. New methods of digging, dating, and analysis revealed that many initial interpretations required significant revision. The peaceful nature of the ancient realm, while still generally accepted, appeared more complex when sites like Anemospilia revealed evidence for human sacrifice. The timeline of development proved more complicated than the relatively simple model had suggested. Modern DNA studies of ancient Cretan populations have provided new insights into the origins and fate of the prehistoric inhabitants. Genetic analysis reveals that the people were descended from the territory's Neolithic farming populations, rather than from migrant groups arriving from elsewhere. Their genetic legacy persists in modern Cretan populations, indicating significant continuity despite the political upheavals of the late prehistoric period. These scientific findings complicate romantic narratives about vanished races and mysterious disappearances. Rather than representing a completely lost people, the ancient inhabitants appear to have been the ancestors of later Cretan populations who continued many traditional practices even after the breakdown of palatial organization. The transformation was real and dramatic, but it did not involve the complete replacement of one population by another. Contemporary excavation projects across Crete continue revealing new aspects of prehistoric life and customs. Digging at sites like Zakros, Palicastro, and Gornia provides evidence for the diversity and complexity of ancient organization beyond the palatial centers that dominated initial attention. Rural settlements, religious sites, and manufacturing centers paint a picture of a remarkably sophisticated and integrated system. The revelation of the ancient settlement at Akrotiri on Thera, preserved under volcanic ash, revolutionized understanding of prehistoric urban life. The well-preserved buildings, complete with their original furnishings and decorations, provide unparalleled insights into daily life, creative traditions, and social organization. Unlike the concrete recreations, these buildings show exactly how ancient construction looked and functioned. Digital technology now enables virtual recreations that avoid the permanent alterations that characterized early restoration efforts. Computer modeling, based on precise measurements and scientific analysis, can recreate ancient buildings and decorative schemes without physically altering the remains. These virtual environments allow visitors to experience rebuilt spaces while preserving the original artifacts for future study. The question of what to do with the concrete recreations remains contentious. Some argue that these early restorations should be removed to expose the original prehistoric remains, allowing modern techniques to reveal what the structures actually look like. Others contend that the recreations have become historical artifacts in their own right, documenting the history of interpretation and early 20th century attitudes. Recent decisions have generally favored preservation of the existing recreations, while clearly marking them as modern interpretations rather than ancient originals. New excavations focus on areas not affected by earlier restoration work, while advanced techniques reveal details of original construction and decoration that the pioneer could never have detected. This approach acknowledges both the historical importance of the early finds and the need for more scientific analysis. The impact of the revelations on our understanding of European prehistory extends far beyond the specific people uncovered. The demonstration that sophisticated urban societies had flourished in prehistoric Europe challenged assumptions about the primitive nature of ancient communities. The evidence for extensive trade networks, advanced technology, and complex social organization showed that sophistication was not unique to the classical realms of Greece and Rome. Educational curricula worldwide now include discussions of prehistoric achievements that would have been unimaginable before the initial excavations. Students learn about ancient creativity, construction techniques, and social organization as part of the broader story of human development. The peaceful nature of this early realm provides important lessons about alternative approaches to political organization and international relations. Popular entertainment continues to draw inspiration from ancient themes and imagery. Films, novels, and television productions feature prehistoric settings that owe much to the excavator's finds and interpretations. Video games allow players to build and manage ancient realms based on evidence. Fashion designers incorporate ancient motifs into contemporary clothing and jewelry collections. The enduring appeal of this ancient way of life reflects deeper human longings for connection to nature, spiritual meaning, and social harmony. In an age of environmental crisis and social fragmentation, the image of a sophisticated realm that achieved prosperity through peaceful cooperation rather than military domination offers hope and inspiration. Whether historically accurate or not, this image serves important psychological functions. New Age and alternative spirituality movements have embraced ancient symbolism and practices, often in ways that stretch the evidence considerably. Divine feminine worship, serpent symbolism, and labyrinth meditation draw inspiration from prehistoric artifacts while serving contemporary spiritual needs. These modern practices may bear little resemblance to ancient religious traditions, but they demonstrate the continuing power of imagery to inspire and transform. Academic conferences and scholarly publications continue to debate fundamental questions about ancient organization and customs. Recent finds and new analytical techniques regularly challenge established interpretations and suggest alternative understandings. The field remains vibrant and controversial, with passionate disagreements about everything from political structures to religious practices. International collaboration has become essential for understanding the broader context of prehistoric Mediterranean societies. The ancient realm can only be fully understood in relation to contemporary communities in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Greek mainland. Comparative studies reveal both unique achievements and shared characteristics that illuminate the broader patterns of prehistoric development. Museums worldwide house ancient artifacts that continue to amaze and inspire visitors. The serpent priestess figurines, bull-leaping frescoes, and elegant pottery vessels represent some of humanity's earliest masterpieces of creative achievement. These objects serve as tangible connections to ancestors whose creativity and skill established foundations for all subsequent European development. The legacy of the pioneering excavations extends beyond digging to influence broader approaches to interpretation and historical understanding. The willingness to make bold interpretations based on limited evidence, while sometimes problematic, demonstrated the importance of imagination and synthesis in bringing the past to life. Modern researchers, while more cautious in their claims, continue to build upon the foundation established. As we stand at the beginning of the 21st century, more than 12 decades after the scholar first uncovered the prehistoric treasures, the ancient inhabitants continue to fascinate and inspire. New technologies promise to reveal details of their lives and achievements that earlier generations could never have imagined. DNA analysis, satellite imagery, and advanced dating techniques are revolutionizing our understanding of prehistoric communities. Yet the fundamental questions that drove the original research remain as compelling as ever. How did human communities first achieve the complex organization necessary for urban life? What conditions enable peaceful prosperity, and what forces lead to breakdown? How do we balance individual achievement with social cooperation, economic development with environmental sustainability, local tradition with international exchange? The ancient inhabitants, as revealed through evidence and filtered through more than a century of interpretation, continue to offer insights into these enduring human challenges. Their achievements remind us of the remarkable creativity and adaptability that have characterized our species throughout history. Their eventual decline warns of the fragility of even the most sophisticated accomplishments when confronted with forces beyond human control. In the ruins of prehistoric palaces and the fragments of ancient creativity, we find not only evidence of a remarkable early realm, but also mirrors reflecting our own hopes, fears, and aspirations. The ancient peoples speak to us across 4 millennia, their voices preserved in clay tablets we cannot read and visual representations we can barely understand, yet their message remains clear. Human creativity and cooperation can achieve wonders that transcend the limitations of any single generation. The story of their rediscovery reminds us that the past is never truly lost, only waiting to be found by those with the curiosity and persistence to search for it. In caves and ruins, in pottery fragments and structural remains, the evidence of human achievement endures, ready to inspire new generations with the knowledge that our ancestors accomplished great things and that we, their inheritors, might accomplish even greater ones.